Since the war's end, no one had spoken for the breakaway systems, but the Emperor had promised this was soon to change. Members of the Separatist Parliament who pledged their loyalty to the Empire, who passed the regime's security checks and who weren't being tried and imprisoned for war crimes, were supposedly coming back soon. They numbered more than 10,000, dwarfing the delegation she'd built. They would come, cowed or ostentatiously devoted to the administration, but they too would possess power. Mon began to smile, and she began to plan. The history of the Republic was not a history of grand schemes and inspired leadership. No history was. Cultural change was unpredictable, composed of subtle shifts, of eddies turned to tidal waves that the brightest and most capable politicians could ride to their own ends. Palpatine had taken advantage of the discontent that had spurred the war long before the war began. Now the war was over, and there were new opportunities. The balance of power was shifting. The Separatists had once been her adversaries, but they were returning home. The Separatists were the key. With their votes, she could reforge the Empire into a cage for its emperor.
If you've seen the movies, doesn't go like that. I'm gonna be real with you.
Does the Emperor dissolve the Senate before or after Alderaan blows up? I forget precisely where.
It's around the same time, but one thing is clear. Mon clearly watched the prequels before the originals. If she had simply watched the original film, she would have known that's not going to work.
By the way, I'm a Death Star truther. I think Alderaan just did that.
Listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.
Welcome back to the Socialist Shelf, and welcome back to another Star Wars episode. We did what? It's been like a year since we did
a whole gender ago, yeah.
Yeah, it's been a whole gender for you. And this time we have a guest. We're really excited to have Manu on the show. We're really excited to have you from NotACast and the Lord of the Rings podcast, my brother, my captain, my podcast, and Mutuals on Blue Sky. I've actually, especially when I was reading Song of Ice and Fire, liked to listen to NotACast. So, definitely been on and off a listener of you for quite a while now. So really cool to get to see you and have you on the show.
Yeah, no, it feels like a natural fit. I'm a socialist and I have book podcasts. So it feels like it's, a match made in heaven.
It works out. Exactly right. I reached out to you about, maybe doing something, and then I knew you liked Star Wars, were interested in it. Andor was coming out around this time. So if you want to just sort of, what is this book, from your perspective? What are we talking about today, and what makes it interesting from your perspective?
What makes it interesting? So, the short answer is Andor.
Mm-hmm.
My Star Wars journey, God, I hate when people give their Star Wars journeys, but anyways, my Star Wars journey begins in the mid 90s. I was one of those people that kind of got in that Shadows of the Empire special edition re-release, run up to the prequel milieu. So I still have, and this was like 95, 96. So I still have a vivid memory of what Star Wars was like at that point in time. And at that time, I got into the novels because there wasn't, Disney Plus or a whole Disney line of Star Wars stories. So you didn't have much. You had some spin-off novels that were as canon as you wanted them to be, and eventually were not canon at all. But I like them.
Tales from Jabba's Palace type beat, for sure.
Yes. But I like them all. I was a big fan of Kevin J. Anderson's Jedi Search trilogy, set 7 years after Return of the Jedi. I read all the big ones, the Timothy Zahn, Admiral Thrawn ones, Courtship of Princess Leia, yada, yada, yada. So I was really into Star Wars. This is when I'm 12, 13 years old. That's when I really fell into it. And then what's it called? What this book is kind of a return to that, because with the exception of, I read Claudia Gray, a couple of her books, Bloodlines and Master and Apprentice, which are about Leia pre The Force Awakens, and then Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn before The Phantom Menace. This was released like in the wake of The Force Awakens. So like when the new Disney Star Wars movies were new. And I like those books, but and kind of like me reading any sort of ancillary Star Wars material is tied to how excited I am about the current state of Star Wars at the time.
Yeah.
So I wasn't reading a lot of stuff like in between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith per se, or around the launch of The Rise of Skywalker. That kind of killed my appetite in Star Wars for a little while. But Andor like really hit for a lot of reasons I'm sure we'll talk about in our conversation. And then I was very excited for season 2, and I always like to do, complementary media consumption, I guess, where it's just like, oh, I'm excited about this thing, I'm going to read a book about it or get into it some other way. I saw this was coming out. I saw that the title of it was pulled right out of Nemec's manifesto from Andor season 1.
Yep.
So I was like, you know what, I'll give it a shot. It sounds like it's going to be based in kind of the same themes as Andor, at least more involved with the political economy of the galaxy and less so the lightsabers and the Death Stars and all of that kind of stuff. So
yeah, no lightsabers to be found in this one. Certainly someone very sad that there aren't any lightsabers, who we'll talk about. Bale's like, I want to see a Jedi slice someone in half one more time before I die, Organa. But yeah, no, I will say though, if you ever do go back to some stuff written in that era, we covered Matthew Stover's Revenge of the Sith, but that one's a lot of fun. And Matthew Stover also has Luke Skywalker in The Shadows of Mindor, which is one of the last published Legends novels. And I don't know if it's good or not because I haven't read it since like it came out, but I just remember to this day like how batshit insane it was.
Is that the one with the clone of Luke that like the difference is he has 3 U's in his name?
No. This is the one where Luke Skywalker like low-key kills an entire planet. And then he's like, I feel so bad about this. I'm going to resign from being a general. But yeah, this book is Mask of Fear, and it is definitely goes along with Andor. We won't go fully into Andor, but it is a series that is about basically the rebellion period, set between Star Wars Episode 3, which is, of course, what we covered when we discussed the Stover novel, and Episode 4, the original film. This is in the period where the Empire is ruling. And whereas Andor is a little closer to the original films in the timeline, this book is set essentially right where we left off. In fact, if you listen to our Revenge of the Sith episode, right where that ends, this basically begins. I mean, even right down to Bail Organa's in that one, hanging out with Yoda. This book opens up with Bail Organa basically sad that he's not hanging out with Yoda. You know what I mean? Like, it really is right after that. The Empire is formed, but it's still like in political foment. Lenore, I know you, I typically ask, if you've read anything, read the book before, but this book came out so recently. I actually think I'll just say really quick what we know about this author. This is Alexander Freed.
Yeah. This book, I believe, takes the new mantle of most recent book we've talked about.
Yes, 100%.
Because it dropped in February of this year.
Definitely. Alexander Freed is not a guy that there's like a ton on. Like he's very much, in his development phase of his career here, even though he's done a lot of cool stuff. He's primarily a video game writer though. He's not primarily a novelist. He's written a few novels, all Star Wars, but he is primarily a video game guy. Most famously, you would know Star Wars: The Old Republic. He was one of the lead writers on that game for a period. Specifically, I believe the Imperial Inquisitor class. He was like, the Imperial Inquisitor class. He was like the main writer for if you play that class in Star Wars: The Old Republic. Not my favorite game in the world, but it's got some cool stuff going on. And then he also wrote the Rogue One novelization. He was one of the people who worked on that. He's worked on a lot of Star Wars comics, individual stuff, mostly their webcomic runs that didn't get actual prints, but a few of their actual prints. And Alphabet Squadron, which is like sort of a novel set after Return of the Jedi in that era. He's a guy who's very much like, paid his dues, been just written on video games, small parts, written on tabletop RPGs, written on all kinds of stuff like that. He's a guy that just has worked a lot of different stuff, a lot of freelance, a lot of things that he's very clearly like ghost written that he can't really just put on his resume. But he's a cool guy. I was reading his his Reddit AMA, and it's mostly about process and stuff like that. I did appreciate him talking about how much he loves 70s fantasy. He took a shot at Sword of Shannara, which I always appreciate. Fans of the show will know my beef with Sword of Shannara, but that's for another day.
It is. We will get around to talking about it.
If eventually, yeah. But yeah, he's a guy that when I did have trouble finding, politics and biography and details aside from the things he's worked on. But he is a guy that is very, very immersed in Star Wars, though. I mean, like for the last almost 15 years, Star Wars has been what has paid the checks for him.
Yes.
And he has said himself that, while he's interested in the fantasy side of Star Wars, and he said one day his dream novel was to write a Star Wars Beowulf from his own posts. He said that he is much more interested in like the mechanical side of the universe, which is pretty clear from this book.
Yeah, there's a lot of what you said about political economy is very apt because, again, no lightsabers to be found. There's a lot of process. There's a lot of politics in this book. I couldn't help but think of, because Mon Mothma's whole plan in this book, right, is to like restrict the executive powers of the Emperor. And I just couldn't help but imagine Palpatine like doing like the ribbon cutting on a fucking like space Walmart or something.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that interesting side to it. We can't also talk about this book without talking about like the rest of the series that it's a part of course. There's going to be 2 more books in the Reign of the Empire trilogy. One by Rebecca Roanhorse, one by Fran Wild, both established sci-fi fantasy writers in their own right. They've both contributed to the Star Wars universe novels and short stories. And those next 2 are going to come out in 2026 and 2027. This, of course, you get to the end of this book, it's very much a chapter 1.
Though it is a complete story, I will say, in its own way.
In its own way, which we will get to.
Yeah, it is something I'm kind of interested because I think maybe some reservations I have about how this book played out might be resolved or absolved rather in the following 2. Do we know anything about whether the following 2 are meant to be like events that happen like pretty immediately after, the same way this one picked up after Revenge of the Sith, or if
we're not
might
sure? It's just subsequent. Part of me thinks that it's going to have a little bit of a jump, but I'm not sure. It's definitely the same characters, though. All we know for sure is that Saw, Bail, and Mon are going to be this at the center of all 3 books.
Oh yeah, no, I just thinking having different authors, it kind of might make sense to have those gaps, so that allows the authors a little space where if they're going to take characters in different directions, they can kind of have that already set in motion, or use the time gap, the silence, and the margins to facilitate that.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm. So of course, the heads, y'all know who Bail Organa and Mon Mothma are. For those less familiar with Star Wars,
everyone knows who these people are. They've all had the action figures. What child did not grow up with Bail Organa on their wall?
Hey, I would argue that Mon Mothma might be the main character of Star Wars after 2 seasons of Andor. Now she's definitely got more screen time.
That is a
than Luke
completely
Skywalker
fair
at
point.
this point.
My immortal voice. If you don't know who she is, to get the fuck out of here. But yes, Mon Mothma is a senator in the Galactic Senate, now the Imperial Senate. She is a wheeler. She's a dealer. She's Space Elizabeth Warren, essentially.
She has the affect of Space Elizabeth Warren, but she is committed to overthrowing the Empire at the very least.
Eventually.
So he has to be kind of dragged into it a little bit by seeing there is no other option.
Eventually, yes. In the previous Star Wars canon, before Disney overhauled everything, of course, she went on to become the Supreme Chancellor of the New Republic after the Emperor fell.
She still does. She still does.
Oh, does she? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. She, in every timeline, Mon is coming out on top. Let's be very clear.
God damn it.
But yeah, she's I do like we made that joke in our group chat that Mon Mothma is like if like Elizabeth Warren was secretly like funding like guerrilla soldiers or something like that, right? She's seen as like a progressive and like real policy wonk probably by your like average person or whatever, but she's she's got a lot going on under the surface, but she is very much like a believer in democracy. She's like, for all the messiness, for all the whatever, I believe in democracy. I believe in the ideals of the Republic, though like it is hard to believe in the ideals of the Republic given everything she's seen.
We have Bail Organa, of course. Bail, his relationship to the main series, essentially, he's Princess Leia's adoptive father, of course, but he's also the consort of the planet of Alderaan. He is the senator from that planet, and
R.I.P. to a real one.
yeah, he's a little bit more of a firebrand. He's a Jedi weeb.
The book opens with him on the planet of Jakku, or not Jakku,
Jeddah.
Jeddah. God, got to keep this straight. The planet of Jeddah with all the people who are like, we're so sad about the Jedi dying. And he's just kind of walking around being sad about the Jedi dying. But like he is the guy in the movies that like saves Yoda and Obi-Wan. He like picks him up, you know,
in his cool like hot rod or whatever.
Manu, what do you think of Bail Organa and Mon before we get into Saw?
Yeah, so Bail Organa, like he's mostly been a supporting character, side character. I haven't dug too much into like the Clone Wars or the Rebels series. I know the character has also showed up in the Kenobi Disney Plus series. So that character has made his rounds into like the Star Wars canon, the Star Wars media. One funny thing before I get into my real thoughts is he had to be recast for Andor season 2. He was, instead of Jimmy Smits, it's Benjamin Bratt. So I had the unique experience of starting the book, reading Bail Organa as Jimmy Smits. But when I actually finished the book, which was after Andor season 2, my mental image of him had changed to Benjamin Bratt.
He's changing, yeah.
So all that aside, so Bail, and my opinion's a little bit colored because I definitely think he's the weaker liberal link between him and Mon, and I think Andor season 2 really kind of highlights that. So I was a little less keen on him. But I think one thing you were talking about with the prequels was how he, saved Yoda. He seemed to have good relations with Padme and Ben Kenobi. So what this book kind of seamlessly is able to extract from that is that this is a guy who just likes the Jedi and respected them institutionally, which again probably goes along with his liberalism. Liberals love institutions. But that allows the Jedi to be part of the story as a structuring absence, and also kind of is coherent with the character we know from the prequels, where he is on good terms with the Jedi and he viewed them as a valuable check on power, or just like kind of like a centering organization within kind of the Republic infrastructure. So this book goes a long way, I think, to actually making that feel real, making it feel organic to who Bail is and all the actions we've seen him take and all the various things. And of course, he is a secret keeper of a Jedi too, or a potential Jedi in Leia. He would know, I assume, that they're Anakin's kids. Or he does know. We know that from the canon elsewhere. His connection to the Jedi is also made manifest through Leia, which comes up a bunch of times. And there is also that fear, maybe something similar to what Ned Stark feels about Jon Snow in A Song of Ice and Fire, that if they find out that his daughter is actually Force sensitive, that his daughter is the son of Rhaegar Targaryen, as it is in Game of Thrones, like that might bring, death and destruction on him, his family, and Leia most of all. So it creates a compelling character who, of the three main characters, is probably the one I'm least compelled by. I think Saw and Mon are clear, but I think with the pathos they give him, they're able to do quite a lot, and they're able to bring in some of that Leia Jedi stuff kind of in absentia, but it gives it the feel so it still feels like a Star Wars novel because, it is Star Wars.
We've mentioned Mon, Bail. We've mentioned Saw's name. Haven't really delved into him. I believe, was Rogue One his first appearance? Do we remember?
Okay, so I think Clone Wars might have been.
Yes, I think so again, I'm not familiar with the Clone Wars cartoon, but he was a long running character in that. But him as played by Forrest Whitaker first debuted in live action in Rogue One. And then that would be a character who would bounce back to appear in Andor. I don't think he's appeared in anything else live action wise, and I don't think he wouldn't be in a show like Rebels or Bad Batch, because all of those are
He
post.
is in the Jedi Survivor games, though.
Oh, that is correct. Yes,
which is the best levels are with him because you just get to be a Jedi who's like doing guerrilla war, which is fucking rules. More of this, please. Saw Gerrera is in Clone Wars, and like there are moments in this book that you're very much like, if you've seen the show, which like, Cartoon Network show, but you're like pointing at it like, oh my God, I know that reference. Talking about Onderon. Because basically in like later seasons of the Clone Wars, where you basically have Anakin and Obi-Wan visit the planet and teach these people how to do like effective underground fighting. And it's interesting because the he is an interesting dynamic because the Republic does not want to directly support these rebels on this planet, because the planet was not really interested in being part of the Republic. They were interested in being sovereign. Onderon was. Um, and Saw Gerrera is not interested in joining the Republic necessarily. He's interested in driving the Separatists out. So the Republic was like, we'll support you, we'll give you weaponry, but we're like not so keen on sending clones. So Saw was never really an official part of the Republic Army. His relationship was always kind of strained at best. And also, Anakin, it was kind of directly the fault of Anakin that his sister died. It doesn't get into this in the book. I mean, not that he did it on purpose, but like, the Jedi being like, we're not here to fight your war for you. And he's like, okay, but you kind of could, like, it wouldn't be that hard. Um, so Saw is like rightfully, especially, when he's running into guys like Bale, and Bale's like, my God, the Jedi, weren't they something? Saw's probably like, yeah, I mean, I appreciate them showing me how to like sneak around effectively and like giving me a crate of bombs, but like, I don't give a shit. Which like Saw is very much like, I mean, we said it earlier. You don't get his perspective in the book because I think it is something that it would be very much like a political treatise. Like it would feel very much like he's the closest, to like a very like revolutionary, like almost like borderline like Maoist type thinking. Like he's thinking, I mean, his name's Saw Gerrera, like, right? Like it elicits like Che Guevara, something like that.
You were mentioning that like particularly his depiction in Andor was kind of like an inside baseball reference to Che. Unpack a little bit about that.
Well, I don't know anything for sure. I do know, though, naming a guy Saw Gerrera and giving him a breathing problem does make me think of, Che Guevara, who had asthma, right? Who is a famous guerrilla fighter. I'm not inside, what's his name, Tony Gilroy's mind or anybody else's, but it's hard not to see those connections be made. And we know in this book, Saw very much from the beginning is like, we're going to have to fight this war at the outskirts, right? He has a very like almost Star Wars third worldist thing where he's like, we can't take it to the heart of the empire yet, but if we can fight this war on the outskirts, we can chip away at imperialism or whatever. That's kind of his conception. And I think in his original depiction in Rogue One, we're kind of meant to feel a little like horrified by him, like he's, too far or whatever. I think Andor, brutal as he is, there's a more sympathetic to him. And in this, it's certainly like he's just kind of the objectively correct,
Oh, I was going to say, if we maybe perhaps view the Clone Wars and then the Rebellion as equivalent to World War I and World War II, I feel like where we are with Saw here is Ho Chi Minh leaving the Treaty of Versailles. Because he was there in 1919. He is returning to Vietnam. They're still fighting the French colonial powers over there. And this is before Mao really has articulated his version of, peasant revolution. So, this is kind of like Ho Chi Minh or Mao at the same time period, because I think 1921 is the foundation of the Communist Party of China. These are times where they're still figuring out, because we just saw the Bolshevik Revolution. They don't really know how to work in their material conditions quite yet, or they're figuring it out with like a very peasant driven. It is not as organized. It is not an industrialized group that he's working with. And that's not really what Saw is dealing with on Onderon. But we do get a sense that he is in that kind of a catastrophic thing happened, that being World War I or the Clone Wars. And as like kind of someone who was radicalized within that milieu, he is now trying to figure things out, that by when we visit him again in Andor and Rogue One, he is someone that has a more committed ideology. So I think you can go and read Mao and Ho Chi Minh's like letters from 1921-22, and they're not nearly as coherent or as well articulated as their works in like the 40s and the 50s would be. So that's kind of where
it is interesting, though. Like it is interesting when you watch Clone Wars. Saw in that, which is it's a lighter depiction because it's a Cartoon Network show, but Saw in that his planet is much less developed. Like they are flying on the backs of like flying monsters.
I was just going to say, I don't want to spoil Andor season 2 to any degree, but Saw actually gives a little backstory of his childhood and upbringing, and they they basically make him seem like he was, working on a rubber plantation in the
Yeah.
Congo or a porter in Southwest, German Southwest Africa. Like he was doing that kind of labor for them. And I think that all kind of really informs, or at least works really well with everything they're setting up with him and kind of the canon that existed, as you were saying, in the Clone Wars.
And they're working to overthrow a puppet monarch, which led
Mm-hmm.
to one of my favorite tweets of all time, which was this motherfucker overthrew the Shah in Star Wars. And that's from years ago. That's like a decade old. Like it was when the Clone Wars episode came out. I just remember losing it.
I mean, that sounds like a Dune thing, to be honest.
Yes, for real. But these are Saul would not be like, out of place in Dune. But these are our three central characters, at the heart of our story, which really they show really Bale and Mon are much more similar than they are to Saul, but they're really like these three pillars of what resistance to the Empire is going to look like going into this story. And basically at the top here, we've got Saw basically like right off the bat, he sees they declare an empire. He's like, yeah, we're going to war immediately. We're not playing around. This is no joke. We're not giving up our weapons. What do you take us for? This is, the French showing up after World War II and being like, can we in Vietnam and saying, can we have our colony back? And it's like, absolutely fucking not. What are
Yes,
you
that's
talking
great.
about? Right.
Mhm.
Whereas you have Mon and Bale, which they're both like, skeptical, and Bale, in fact, even knows about Palpatine being a Sith Lord, literally, has seen Yoda with sparks coming off of him. And they're like, okay, they've got Bale thinks if I show the galaxy the truth about the Jedi, my favorite guys, they'll know that that they'll rise up and overthrow Palpatine. And Mon is like, if we can simply push a bill through the Senate before Palpatine grabs power, we can vote out fascism. If we vote blue, no matter who, we can defeat the fascists.
Vote Mon and then you've won.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah, and it's certainly at the opening of the book, it sets you up to believe that perhaps this is possible. I mean, what we open, of course, as we mentioned, with Bale on Jeddah in the Holy City. There is a service in mourning of the Jedi. People are pushing this like stone wheel around. Basically, it's kind of a ritual thing. He began to sweat as he pushed despite the cold because he joins in, yet the disc was moving. It seemed that his efforts made no difference, that the larger and stronger mourners were entirely in control, yet he pushed anyway, and stone scraped against stone. So this is a mover, this is a shaker, but it's somebody who exists in the context of much larger forces, certainly. But we are led to believe that what he's doing just might matter, even if we don't see that at first.
And we also see, this is a empire that's not quite solidified yet, right? By the time of Andor, there's not a whole lot of questions of what the empire is, what it looks like. There's nobody debating, is the Senate more powerful than the emperor? Like people know where it is at. At this point, like none of this shit is codified. They're introducing governors. You've got Mon walking around and, droids coming up and asking questions for the press of like, why did you introduce this or that? They're interrogating senators, but they don't feel confident enough to just outright remove them quite yet. They which is interesting to me. But you got this interesting pitch of the empire when Mon is sitting there talking with her friend Lude, who's a like more conservative type guy that's in the Senate, I guess. I wrote down in my joke that my thing that I think they've got a Ruth Bader Ginsburg Scalia thing going on.
Yeah, you definitely do get the sense that this guy's like a Republican, right? If we're trying to draw direct comparisons, she'd openly scorned his affected parochial speech, his hypocritical protectionism, always right for his home world, never for the rest of the Republic, and worse, his willingness to court voters who were isolationist at best and xenophobic at worst. Not a big stretch here to I think Ginsburg and Scalia, I think your comparison is pretty correct.
But I like this quote he says, because he does explain why people are accepting this quite well. Forget the job for a second, he said. Forget you're obsessed with the inner workings of government and spend your days with people who share your obsession. When you're riding to your office or sitting in a diner eating food that was clearly thawed moments ago, tell me things don't feel more normal than they have in ages. Tell me you're not finally catching your breath with the war over. And then it says he was right in the way Luke occasionally was right. For 3 years, they lived in existential fear. Now Palpatine was emperor and the galaxy was changing and it was all so ordinary, except when it wasn't. And I think, and it returns this several times throughout the book. Why are people accepting this? Because shit sucked before this.
Mhm.
And this is at least like stability of some kind.
Yes, even like the most righteous of revolutions all through history, eventually the people do tire of it, of being at war. We saw it in France at the end of the 18th century. I'm not going to throw the Bolshevik Revolution under the bus. That wouldn't be me. But it is something that's very common to see, where it just eventually, and it strains everyone, right? It's not just I'm sick of war, but it might affect employment. It might affect the availability of food, other necessary services.
Right.
It might limit your ability to move around the galaxy, which is, we're led to believe the Republic was one big, interconnected unit. So now if half the planets or half the galaxy is no longer accessible to you, that be causing strains. It probably divided families at some level. So you can see why people are ready for it. And even now, who was it? Warren G. Harding ran on Return to Normalcy. His campaign invented the word normalcy. It's just like, even though, shit was going to suck even worse shortly after World War I, people still just wanted to settle down and, just have to worry about like their commute for a little while.
Right.
And not whether, and, Coruscant eventually did become a theater of the war. We saw that in the opening of Revenge of the Sith. There was a siege.
Great passages from Stover's novel, by the way. Highly recommend.
Mm-hmm.
And I like how they brought some of that back too, as they're, walking through Coruscant. They'll be like, oh, this part of the city planet, I guess it is, hasn't been rebuilt yet. You can still see, carbon scoring. You can still see crashed TIE fighter, or not TIE fighters, but whatever the clone and Republic ships were. So I think it gives that a feeling too, because there's no point in the prequels where you're really on the ground in the war, except maybe like 10 minutes in Kashyyyk. It does feel like, you don't really ever get the effect of what does this mean outside of the like 7 characters we're following. So you kind of do get that sense. And I do think it's a bold, but also great choice that they are starting this like 3 days after Revenge of the Sith or whatever it is. Because that is, that is a moment of contingency, like these like great pivot points in history, going from a republic to an empire with the extermination of the Jedi. A lot of things are up in the air. Like you were saying, the empire barely knows what the empire is at this point. They're still trying to consolidate power. They're putting in place these governors. Guys like Tarkin are going to be, are on the rise. We got a glimpse of him at the end of Revenge of the Sith. So it is kind of like everyone trying to do, and it's kind of fun, kind of doing it from the point of view of these kind of ground level characters, because knowing what we do know about Palpatine being like a space wizard, like what he's thinking, while Mon Mothma's like, I think this bill might be the thing to limit his overreach on this specific policy issue. Whereas he's more like, this is how I'm going to turn everyone in this universe into like a way to suck out their life force to enhance the Sith or something like that.
How will I prevent their Senate supermajority from stripping me of my executive power? The parliamentarian has caused problems for my agenda. Sad.
Sad.
I can't, it is interesting. Obviously, I'm never going to be the guy who's like, Star Wars is literally Donald Trump. Like, you don't want to be that guy. You don't want to just do with Star Wars what liberals do with Harry Potter.
Certainly
However,
not.
I did see some interesting stuff where like constantly in this book, they're like, oh, our new empire. Ha 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 ha. Isn't that silly? Like, that's something I loved. I loved like little elements like that where they introduce and people are like, yeah, it's the same shit.
The bits where Mon's thinking about like, oh, the Grand Vizier and his interns are running around doing that. It certainly hits different in the era of Doge.
Yeah, I sincerely think there is something too. Like people are like, yeah, it's kind of all the same shit, and it'll all calm down. Which like the answer to that is yeah, maybe, and maybe it won't. But also, I think this book does a good job of showing why this all emerges, which even before the war, this was not a particularly good society or democratic society. In fact, Mon lets on at one point that almost half the representatives in the Senate, even at the best of times, were never elected. It's like, I mean, the Republic as a name is already like kind of not an earned title. And you have who I would maybe put forward as one of the best characters, if not the best characters in this book, is one of the best examples of why the Republic was a failure. And I know Lenore is especially partial to this character, if you'd like to introduce him.
Yeah, this guy was pretty neat. We of course have Sogen Vaknalis as another major sort of deuteragonist here. He's a POV character. We see him in chapter 2.
They said we can't get inside Saul's head because it would just be quotations from Chairman Mao, top to bottom. So we got to have a guy to follow him around.
He's
exactly
the Davos Seaworth of this book. Just same way Davos is our eyes on Stannis Baratheon for all of book 2, basically.
Liam Cunningham with like cybernetic implants. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Perfect.
He is
Wait, that would be sick. Wait a second.
Yeah, we need to keep him around.
He would maybe have to get a little older, but you know.
Sogen Vaknalis, of course, he is
he's a bug man.
He's in the Separatists' employ. His species was dying from some like genetic blight that prevented like them from like fertility or whatever. And it's on those grounds that the Separatists recruited them, because they were like, look, the Republic has the technology to bring y'all back from the brink of extinction. They're not doing it. We're going to help you out. How that turns out, of course, Sogen ends up being a means to an end. And his whole trajectory is interesting, because you start with him awakening, going in search of a Separatist dead drop that'll like give him orders for his next mission or whatever. And gradually he comes to the conclusion that, look, I'm done being a tool. I'm just going to take down the biggest dog that's like the greatest sources of suffering in the galaxy, which of course is leaping ahead a bit, but the Emperor.
Mm-hmm. Yes. What do you think about Sogen, Manu?
I was a fan of his character. It's in some of these newer characters that you have to, kind of find a new angle, because I think you come into this book with ideas about Saw and Mon or Bale, or at least, a lot of us who are more into the Star Wars universe do. Sure. Sogen is someone that you are picking up cold and having to run with. I really love how he's used. Again, like I said, I love that Saw is not a point of view character. Getting it through Sogen's point of view, I think, is great. There is a couple of lines from Andor season 1 I think about with him. First, there's this character Vel who says that everybody has their own rebellion, and then later on, this character Skeen, he says, "Yeah, my rebellion is me versus everyone else." And I kind of imagine Sogen existing kind of in between those two worlds, where I think he still has kind of a mission or something that he feels like he's part of a bigger cause, but he does also feel like a complete loner and isolated element in it. And that makes, very compelling, because as we're in his head, we see how he is able to change his like immediate prerogative based on what's going on. Because at first he's following around Saw when he, stumbles upon their band. And he's like, I can be with Saw while it's useful for me and gets me closer to my goal. But he's able to pivot later on when he runs into Bale and Hockey, I believe, who I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute as well. And you see how seamlessly he is able to kind of really pivot his plan. And it might not really be a pivot, because he might not be thinking that far ahead. It could be just like what gets me to the next day or to the next planet. But he's able to identify that, hey, me and Bale might align on this one thing that'll get me close to the Emperor, because he needs to get to Coruscant, and get to Coruscant in a way safely would be a great way to do it. Bale, obviously being a senator, could be someone who could provide that for him, probably much more likely than Saw Gerrera ever could. So you could see that he's like kind of a very canny character. Like he's very aware of what's going on and is able to adjust and pivot. And I really like that about him.
There's so much of Star Wars when you watch the films are these grand, and of course we love this kind of thing too, these grand shots of a million people shooting at each other, sometimes in spaceships, sometimes not. And it can be very hard to think about what's in the skull of an individual guy on the ground shooting. And when it's a bunch of clones and a bunch of droids, then you think about it even less. And I think what this character allows us to do is get in the head of what not just does one of these people think like and act like, which we see a little bit in a show like Clone Wars, which it tried to do. What does a Confederate think like? What did someone, which, we're bearing some American stereotypes with the word Confederate, but they were still pretty bad. They were still pretty bad in this world too. We know that. With comparing, do some kind of comparison to Grievous and Lee, we'll see. But the what does somebody who like broke away from the Empire and he made a specific choice, and now he's, or not in the Empire, the Republic, a specific choice, and now he's cut free in the galaxy, this individual who's just kind of a gun, and in a grand scene would just be one of the guys who gets shot, or doing the shooting. And we even have a scene of him remembering a battle where he just sees a Jedi run by and kill like 1,000,000 guys. What is somebody that, like, in a Battle of Geonosis type scene we might see for a fraction of a second? What's his motivation? What's his backstory? Well, he's got family that's dying. He's angry and he's becoming increasingly hateful. And when you're in his perspective, you're like, yeah, no, this makes perfect sense. Like, you could see the separatist angle. You see why they became separatists. You see why he hates the Republic and the Empire that came after it. And then these different characters, when they're making these alliances and stuff, you see how it happens on the interpersonal level, but then it's of course all part of this like broader geopolitical game.
Yeah, I mean, even
geopolitical. What's the word?
Galactopolitical? Perhaps? I'm not sure. But yeah, even without his specific angle of like genetic blight, species extinction, all that, you're absolutely right. There is a tragedy inherent in being a regular guy on the sidelines, or on the front lines, really, of a galaxy that's ruled by Jedi and Sith and these towering figures that can like sweep a hand and like just like force push 1,000 people like off a continent or whatever.
You can also die in like 2 shots though if the plot calls for it, unfortunately.
Yeah, his being a gun, I think you put it really well. We'll get into the specifics of that, but like there's bits where like his cybernetic augments like are detrimental to his ability to like whistle, right, and to vocalize like the songs of his people, right? In joining the cause that he believes will save his people, he's only been further alienated from them, and that's fascinating to me.
Then there's a other character we mentioned her. There's also Hockey as this other perspective that's
Hockey
in this book.
Zeofrine.
Yes. And she's like basically like a 9 to 5 spy. Like she clocks in, clocks out. She's got a little tea by her desk. I had trouble picturing her because every like new description it gave of her like kind of messed up the image I had in my head before. She's got long ears and like a long droopy mouth, but also no nose. I'm not quite sure what to make.
She's also got like she's a Heptuinian, and this is what is very silly about Star Wars. What I find very
There's
silly.
Nothing silly about Star Wars. This is deadly serious.
She's got this like her species has this like organ at the base of its neck that stores like half an hour's worth of oxygen, and narratively, the purpose of that is precisely so that she avoids drowning in this one like disaster that happens partway through the book.
That happened to me.
The plot armor organ.
No. Hey, look, you never know. But she like it even describes her sitting at her desk and like in her little intel job, and she's got some candies and some little pictures of her kids, and her whole motivation in life. She says it to her sort of apprentice.
Stability.
Yeah, she says stability. I'll read it. Old woman voice. That's right. The Empire is unstable. New governments, post-war governments, they always are. Mothma, Organa, and the rest of them. Doesn't matter if they're plotting to overthrow Palpatine or if they're handing out flyers. They could topple the whole Empire by accident because that's what instability means. I always imagine her sounding kind of tired. But that's what she believes. She's like, Empire, Republic, same shit. She uses the words interchangeably because, again, she's just like, she comes from a place where she was like, I've seen instability. I've seen war. I do not care if we're fascist. I do not care if we're a republic. I do not care. I don't want to live in a situation where turbo lasers are blowing up blocks right down the street from me again. I don't care beyond that, which is, of course, Emperor Palpatine's entire plan. It's why he orchestrated the war.
Yeah, no, something I find interesting is, we don't think of too many truly alien characters being part of the Imperial apparatus, right? They
No.
are usually, for the most part, humanoid characters, like just straight on human characters. And that, that has a political bent that certain, Star Wars, creatives, play with. Sometimes they just ignore entirely. And, obviously, if this is a multi-species galaxy, you're going to need spies of different species. But it does make me think about maybe not like a comprador class that like collaborates with Imperial rule, but like, maybe like the sepoys, like the Indian soldiers that work for the British Raj or something like that, or the East India Company, where, their country was just completely devastated by colonization and famines and all this stuff. And then, hey, sign up to, work for the East India Company or, the Galactic Empire or the Republic, as it was probably when hockey did it. And it's like, sure, if this is stable, if this makes sure I can have a home, a roof over my head, 3 square meals a day. I guess she doesn't need oxygen as much as other people, but that as well.
A little bit.
So you could see where there could be an allure, and this is why I'm kind of interested, because I do think this is a character we might see again,
Yes.
perhaps in the future books. Her fate is a little bit ambiguous. I don't know how far we're going to get with it, but I think there is an interesting role to play in that aspect, because she has a very different relationship from the Empire, both in the sense in what kind of levers of power she has access to relative to like Bail or Mon, but also in the fact that she just kind of views it as like a centering force. It's good to have a calendar, a planner, so she knows where she's going to be tomorrow at 3 p.m. spying on someone, surely, but the fact that she's able to just completely dissociate, that represents a real type of people, right? Like, I would say there are a lot of people that are probably working under the U.S. government as led by Trump, who were probably there back when Obama was there, and it's like, fuck yeah,
Yep.
Obama. But it's like, yeah, I'm still working. I don't care that Trump's in charge.
One such person, Tom Homan. He was an appointee of Obama,
Perfect.
and he's doing largely the same thing now.
In this, I'm trying to make some connection. Tom Human, I don't know.
He is not a human, I will tell you.
No,
that
he's
much.
not. Deeply inhuman.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting with her too, because she kind of writes off, the more extreme stuff. Like, oh no, it'll be fine. It'll come and go. But we know from like Mom behind the scenes, like she's at like a party and like there's speeches from like human supremacists. And she was like, that was a fringe belief a few years ago, which like makes me think that there's like a Star Wars Curtis Yarvin out there that's like influencing these motherfuckers, which like there basically
Yarvin,
is with this.
Yarvin
like,
is a Star Wars ass name.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
it is. Not to give him the credit, he probably thinks he's a Star Wars character. I'll lightsaber fight him any day. But and in hockey, we even know at the end of the novel, we don't know specifically why, but at the end, like she's been like busting her ass, and we just hear at the end for no particular reason, oh yeah, no, she's out. She's out. We're fucking done with her. Maybe it's because she's an alien, maybe it's because she's old. It doesn't matter. She was gone long enough that they cooked her. They got rid of her. So we even see this apparatus, this stability she's serving. They're not particularly interested in taking care of her. I kept making like notes that are just like meaningless. They were just for me, that I was like hockey USA ID or something like that. Like I'm trying to make it, she's more like a CIA, FBI type, but like, it's also interesting because she clearly like cared about the people she was the handler for. And she even has this apprentice who is it Chemish or Chimish? How do you say that? Chemish?
I was thinking Chemish.
Chemish. Regardless, I honestly don't have a lot to say about them, but we have official non-binary character in Star Wars.
Our non-binary monarch Chemish.
I do like that. I do like that. The fascists in this too they don't give a shit if you're non-binary. They just give a shit if you want to serve the Galactic Empire, which is cool. We don't have to deal with that. But Lenore, is Chimish added to the official canon of Lenore's like non-binary baddies?
They can definitely
alongside Delphi and whatnot.
They can definitely make me worse. Although, we still have much more to see from them, certainly. But Chemish is interesting, right? Because their sort of role in all this is the link between your state actor in hockey, right, and the people on the ground. We're thinking of the 4040s right now. The 4040s, of course, are a sort of citizens brigade that is that does agitation, that does organizing in the name of the new empire. And so Chemish is kind of they're kind of embedded with these people because their political tendency, as it happens, is tied to an assassination that takes place, or an attempted assassination on Mon Mothma. And that's the interesting part of this empire, right? Is because, yes, there are people who are whose actions are tolerated in the name of establishing the new sort of strategy of tension. Of course, the end of chapter 1 is the crowd of Jedi mourners being attacked by a suicide bomber who hated the Jedi, right? But nevertheless, like your Imperial intelligence, your Haki Zeophrines, they want to keep an eye on political tendencies that can potentially be a little too adventurous.
There's so much shit going on in this book.
Yeah.
You don't really realize it while you're reading it.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about, because the FBI and CIA are right on top of every right-wing movement, fracture group, the Ku Klux Klan. They basically already have a feeling about every like mass shooting that's before it's about to happen. There's like, oh yeah, we had that guy on our radar. We did nothing, of course, because what he was going to do does not threaten our rule of things. So that's totally fine. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing a little bit with Chemish, is that, they are monitoring these people who I kind of envision as like Free Corps or Freikorps people, like the Germans who came home from World War I, just going back to that analogy, and who were basically used by the Social Democrats to go, basically
Rosa.
do their extra legal violence to, help support them. I guess that makes Mon Mothma Rosa Luxemburg in this case.
Rosa Luxemburg, if she made it through.
Yeah. So, which I love, because
joined the parliament.
I'm the biggest gasser of Mon Mothma. I am her number one fan. So almost specifically from Andor. Just the thing is, if you've only watched the TV shows and the movies, you only really know Mon Mothma from Andor and 30 Seconds combined from the Skywalker saga. So
many Boffins died to bring us this information.
This is so interesting to me because, like, Jacob, you can attest, I've been hating on Mon Mothma all week.
But yeah, Lenore, speak to that, because I feel like I'm an enlightened centrist on this one. But what was it that you didn't like about Mon Mothma, Lenore?
She's a liberal. Like, she spends all
this she is, but by Andor she certainly is not.
Okay. Well, even in Andor, like, she's still kind of shaking off that unprincipledness. There's a bit in Andor season 1, which I watched as homework for this, where she's trying to secure a loan to cover this like discrepancy in her accounts, and the banker that's offering it to her is like, okay, well, I can cover this for you. In exchange, I want you to put your daughter in this arranged marriage with my kid. And at first she's like, no, this is where I draw the line. To which the banker responds, that's the first untrue thing you've said in our conversation. And that's the thing. Like, there's so many compromises that like Mon Mothma is willing to make. Even as she hears the new governors like talking about human supremacy and slavery, which, by the way, already exists throughout the galaxy at points. She's trying to get very, very wealthy interests to turn class traitor here in exchange for like the government looking the other way. And what ends up happening is just a mass like reshuffling of deck chairs on a plantation patio, right? To see Mon Mothma as well, like there's a bit where she has her friends investigated by Imperial intelligence in the name of maybe tying up their resources, which doesn't even work. She gets apprehended and questioned anyway. Like, she just comes off to me as very chauvinistic.
Manu, what do you think?
Yeah, no real complaints on this. When I say she's my favorite character, it's because, again, of 2 seasons of Andor as performed by Genevieve O'Reilly, which is actually funny because everything Lenore was just saying about this banker that she makes this deal with and has to give up her daughter as part of an arranged marriage. That is the first arc of Andor season 2, and the payoffs to that are wild.
It's so fucking good.
I don't want to get into it here for people who haven't watched, but I think the payoff for that is real good. I think if I was going to do some kind of cope to try and save my beloved Andor character in the context of this book, maybe I'd compare her to maybe the only or one of the 2 decent, or I'll say historically progressive U.S. presidents, Abraham Lincoln, and his views on slavery, I guess. Because I think one of the things, I think it gets kind of lost in the more reductive, oh, he was a moderate, oh, he was an emancipator, the kind of the two ends of it, is I think there is a real, he like rose to the moment, like he grew in the moment, and he like adjusted his beliefs, and he went from someone who was maybe a little bit more moderate on the issue over the course of a war to being someone who was absolutely an abolitionist by the end of it. So Mon Mothma, yeah, she's a liberal, but I think for most of us, we were all liberals at one point.
Yeah.
Thankfully, not at the age Mon Mothma is here. Although I guess she's probably still young. She's probably a really young senator, especially given that Chandrila, like adulthood, is basically age 15, and they might be getting into government early. I mean, Senator Leia, right? She was like 18 years old when she was in the Imperial Senate. So
Yeah.
Not uncommon, especially for, more rigid monarchical places to perhaps have kind of that kind of infrastructure. So anyways, all that's to say is I think she's young here. She has time to grow. She's listening. She's learning. And I think by the end, she knows she's going to have to firebomb a couple Walmarts if she's going to want to overthrow the emperor. So I do agree. I think she's liberal here. And I do think, again, maybe an important thing is this book is supposed to perhaps be in conversation with Andor, right?
100%.
So we're supposed to know kind of where her end state is, and then know that that's kind of what we're working toward, and this is where she began. And I think it especially works with Bail, but I think Bail kind of stays in that more liberal mode. And I think Andor season 2 bears that out a little bit, whereas he still tries to stick to the way things are done, whereas Mon kind of turns off that path just sooner than him. They're both at Yavin by the time of Rogue One, but still, I think it is part of it, and I think that's why I'm very interested in what the gap's going to be between book 2 and then again book 3. So that's something I'm very specifically interested in tracking, because I don't think Bail is going to get any more really radical than he is. He seems like right about on course, and Saw I don't think can get more radical. He just has to figure out his strategy kind of thing. Like he doesn't have
Saw's never seen a Walmart that he didn't envision immediately.
Yes.
In flames.
Like he's already doing the practice. He needs to like work on the theory and the actual mode of his revolution, but I don't think he's going to be more radicalized against those in power than he is now. And again, he dies before in the very first usage of the Death Star. So he doesn't even see that awesome power to radicalize him, right?
Yeah.
He is already there when we meet him in Rogue One and Andor. So
it's kind of fascinating. Saw Gerrera and Bail Organa both died of the Death Star. They 2 of the 3 principal characters of this book, because Bail Organa dies on Alderaan. And I was going to say off screen. I guess technically on screen. He's just very, very tiny. You have to zoom in.
One of 2 billion voices suddenly silenced. Yeah.
Yeah. He's one of them. And he was saying, I wish I could see the Jedi just one more time.
He gets better about that at the end.
We obviously, there's a lot going on in this book, and we've been doing a lot of grand summary. We don't have to go through everything beat by beat, but I wanted to say broadly what Bail's kind of mission is throughout the course of this book is he links up with Hockey, or rather she links up with him, because he is on a quest to figure out, okay, I know the Jedi didn't do this. These videos, I know they're fake. I know they were made with whatever the AI generated video software is in the Star Wars universe. Yoda clearly has an extra finger in that video. But I gotta prove that this is fake. I gotta prove, that this was made. I can't remember. I was gonna say ChatGPT. That's not how that works. ChatGPT doesn't make videos.
But you do bring up an interesting point, which is like how advanced forgeries must be in Star Wars. We don't really get into it. Well, a little bit with like the authenticity.
Clearly,
it
takes work though.
Yeah, exactly. And the only reason that Bail can see through it is his like personal relationship to these like space mystics. That's like, okay, well, Yoda wouldn't have said this, Ki-Adi-Mundi wouldn't have said this. There has to be more to it.
He's like, wait, Yoda was talking forwards in that video. Yoda's like, we must train child soldiers. And he's like, I know Yoda, and when he was there, he said, child soldiers, we must train.
But yeah, like quite apart from his personal like connection to the Jedi and their philosophy, of course, like Bail knows, you're exactly right. If he can call the Emperor's narrative of the Jedi as a Praetorian Guard, doing Praetorian Guard things into question, he can sow doubt in the whole edifice.
when I realized what his plan was for this book, I wrote that he was just trying to do the Mueller report, basically. Like, and no, I mean, like, it's good to expose when bad people do bad things. Let's be very clear. But Bale is very much in this book, does not understand how far this shit has gone
Oh
at
yeah,
this point. Would y'all agree?
100%. There's I think the Bale doesn't understand it. Mon doesn't understand it. Sojen, in his own way, he's I mean, he doesn't know that, like, he's, you say he's a gun, he is also a bomb, and we'll get into that. But, like,
Mm,
there's so much of
he
this
become bomb.
that's people realizing that this is so much bigger than any one of them, any one of their tendency, right? And of course, of course, this is crystallized very well in Mon Mothma's talk with Mas Amedda toward the end.
But basically Bale and Hockey, who is just there to track him, though, he realizes that about halfway through his trip, because he's a very trusting person, despite, his attempts to not be. He will go on a quest around the galaxy, mostly off page, thankfully, because I think that could have gotten pretty tiresome pretty quickly, if it was like a bunch of different little Confederate planets. Um, Basically visiting different people who were in the Confederacy, who were various propaganda ministers or this, that, and the other, different leads, to figure out, because he realizes the Confederacy very likely could have created fake propaganda. They had very high quality propaganda, and Palpatine could have taken that and used that. The way this links up is because Sojin, the data cache with that information, was there on the planet where he was basically kind of entombed, waiting to be released on the galaxy by the Confederacy, along with a bunch of weapons and stuff, basically as a destabilizing force. And since Saw and Sojin are together, because Sojin is taking Saw to get the guns, they both always right about to betray each other at every possible second.
Sojourn
Hands,
killed several of Saw's men at points.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
hands on the gun. That's how they end up linking up, is with Bale seeking them out, and Hockey at first, like, okay, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna check out Confederate space, see what happened to my operatives, and her being increasingly dragged into a situation where she doesn't realize the Empire is perfectly happy to kill her ass as well. That's a very quick explanation for a lot of things that happen, but we don't got to go into the detail of every moment that Bale almost blows his leg off with a landmine or whatever.
I do wonder, like, because a lot of this, Bale's plan is animated by his own love of the Jedi. So that's why he puts this outsized importance on this fact that maybe if we can implicate that, the Jedi were murdered, that the story we felt was falsified. Because a lot of what he's doing is like trying to find these forged seals of like Imperial records, because he believes that they were able to forge these seals. And that's how the Emperor was able to show this like doctored footage, essentially. Um, and it's like, I'm wondering, is like, what would even that look like in our real life? Like if in 1964 they came out and said, yes, Kennedy was assassinated by the CIA with help from, the mafia and ex-Cuban patriots or whatever, like, would that have changed anything? What, like, even knowing the truth? And I do think not knowing the truth did kind of break this country. Like that is one of the major fissures that would eventually turn into Nixon, which would turn into Reagan, which turns into where we are now. Like these all things all build on each other. But I do wonder, like, what is that ripple effect? Like, what could that possibly be? Because because the prequels don't really ever give us a on the ground look at things, we don't really know what the common people feel about the Jedi. And given that just like 18 years later, when we're in A New Hope, they talk about the Jedi like they're ancient and extinct. So like, how many people even knew that the Jedi were around and doing stuff 30 years ago or whatever? Is that kind of like built into like what their importance is? Because yeah, I mean, we would all love to believe that if we just share the right piece of information that just lays bears the awfulness of how things are, that people will snap into reality. And I think
Right.
like the last 2 years here, watching the genocide in Gaza makes that very clear that absolutely isn't the case. And this is a immature empire, immature as in it hasn't had a chance to mature. So they probably don't have all the media locked down quite like they do by the time we get to Andor and stuff. Andor season 2 does a nice job of showing what Imperial media looks like.
God, it's
Again,
brutal.
the Empire here is still trying to figure out what it is. Like you said, what it is right now is still kind of being figured out. well, the Emperor's in charge. We know that. He has this amazing wizard samurai at his, side that's doing things, even though it doesn't seem like anyone else really knows about Vader at this point. Which is, one thing I'm curious about with Bale specifically is like, do you know about Darth Vader? And wouldn't mentioning Darth Vader help make this story make a lot more sense? But I guess maybe he's just afraid to do it without evidence. But still,
maybe the I guess maybe trying to line it with canon, because I will say reading Alex Freed's some of his commentary, he does try to be very respectful of canon. Like he's pretty detailed like that in a way that, if I was working on this, I wouldn't probably care quite as much. It is what it is. He's probably just like, well, Vader is probably not fully recovered right now, that kind of thing, like in this exact period. But it is interesting. I mean, I wonder if the books in this trilogy will get into that. And if Bale, even if he doesn't know who Vader is, if he's like, yo, this guy is chopping people with a lightsaber, that's fucked up.
It seemed to be implied by the worst television show of all time, Kenobi on Disney Plus, which exists kind of like halfway in between A New Hope and Revenge of the Sith. So like 10 years after Revenge of the Sith or thereabouts, that people didn't really know Vader was out there. Like he wasn't like an active figure as part of the Empire. And something has to have changed, right? Because when, Princess Leia meets Vader at the beginning of A New Hope, it's a Darth Vader. I should have known you were involved. So clearly he is a public figure of some sort. But like, it seems like 10 years prior to the events of A New Hope, that wasn't the case. So that could also be something that theoretically this story might at least give us clues as to. I'm sure they're waiting to do a Disney Plus series about the coming out of Darth Vader, or whatever they're going to call it. He has a little
so happy for him to come out,
be your true self.
Yes,
yeah, good for her. But no, what you say about like the sort of ambiguity with which Vader, the Jedi, like their role, their powers, like whether or not they were like even real to some people. I mean, it's fascinating to me because like it's a galactic scale from the beginning, from New Hope, before there was any other like expanded universe stuff. And yet you do see a progression in scale and in stakes nonetheless. I mean, I'm thinking in particular of like Sogen on the dead planet Ao de Juritz, where the Separatist cache is, right? He's looking at it, and he's just like taking in its scale, and he's like, Ao de Juritz turned to him as Sogen stood on an endless plain under a red sky, a land without land, and the world screamed at him in static, screamed without words, I will consume you, and the 7 clans will suffocate in my stomach. I am a planet, and in eons I will still be here, whereas you will only nourish me. You will disappear from memory with your people who have no homeworld to remember them. And I'm reading this, and I'm like, this is somebody who has not conceived of a Death Star. This is somebody to whom a planet is like the biggest and most intimidating thing. And we haven't encountered something that can crack it yet. And the sort of the attention to what is and isn't possible in the eyes of the public is what I really like about this book. Because again, that's not settled, right? There's still people who worship the Jedi. There's still people who are burning Jedi in effigy. These things are still being hashed out. And I love the way that this book engages with how the narrative is never really settled.
There are people in this book who are Palpatine supporters who think it is possible Palpatine's idea came from them. They say it out, and they say that the 40/40 people later on literally throw out, we've been advocating this a while. Maybe Palpatine thought of it on his own. Maybe he heard about us at some point. Like, the people in this world have a very, their perspective of scale is all over the place. Also, I couldn't help but think in that scene with, several of the scenes on this dead planet of thinking of Revenge of the Sith, Matthew Stover, the novel where Anakin is constantly thinking about the concept that even stars can die and getting freaked out about that fact. And that gives him like a panic attack to think about the concept of the supernova. And it's hard, that comparison of like that things on the galactic scale and dead planets and dead civs. And it's interesting. A lot of the action actually takes place on this dead planet, this civilization that we don't know what happened to it, but it was a whole planet of a city. It's like Coruscant. No one knows really what occurred, but all the people are dead now. Obviously it's very much like this could be our future.
Well,
And
specifically, like, hockey has this musing on it, right? Maybe, it's a dead planet. Nobody really knows why it's dead. It's largely intact, apart from like the dilapidated nature of the buildings. And she's like, well, maybe this is why, like, it's been the subject of a bunch of like, fiction and documentary. Like, it looms so large in the galactic imagination because it represents the hope of a natural death, right? As opposed to like death by like
getting death
disaster.
started. Yeah.
Yeah. I maybe I'm alone in this, but I also kind of read Io Dirgitz. What is that how it's said? But
Aerodurits, maybe.
Ao Dirgitz almost as Earth. Like that could be our
Mm,
planet. Like that's
for
how I
sure.
kind of think, because I kind of view our planet moving towards the Coruscant model, or at least most of it's developed and industrialized. So that's kind of how I read it. So it's a warning both to the characters in the universe, perhaps a universe to ours, and that maybe one day we're just going to be a tourist site for a bunch of aliens, because that's basically what it is. Because even Mon talks about like going on a field trip there when she was younger, right? Like, not this is like so far dead that it's like literally a place where people just go and like visit for a little bit,
Mhm.
which gives it a kind of a different feel. It's like eventually, it's like the people who go and visit the Titanic and then die doing that,
Mhm.
which is great. But
Oh yeah, the anniversary of that is this week, isn't it?
Mm.
happy anniversary. I hope we all celebrate.
Yeah, it is interesting too, though. But yeah, a lot of people die on this trip to it because they're trying to get into this separatist cache with all these guns, and Bale's trying to find his thing, and Bale is quickly after seeing Saw Gerrera immediately taken into custody, and Bale's sort of idealism is coming out because when clones land to arrest them, clones that are very much coming to kill Bale and anyone else they find, Bale is still sitting there thinking, Bale imagined clone troopers triggering the explosives, these mines. The image of white armor splashed with crimson was vivid. No matter their part in the destruction of the Jedi, the clones were still victims, forced into lives of violence. Now Saul's guerrillas were ensuring these clones would never live to escape their roles. The guerrillas were simply too cruel, too cynical, or simply too loyal to question despicable orders, and none of that boded well for Bale, Hockey, or the troops on the surface. So you still have Saw, after being in the Senate, presumably voting on, trillions of credits being sent to wars to bombard planets, admittedly mostly droids, but plenty of people living there too, kind of on this concept of like still uncomfortable with the idea that like, oh, well, we're going to kill these clones. I mean, they're here to kill us, but like, and of course, Bale is eventually going to have to come around on this. He's eventually going to help fund the Rebel Alliance and shit like that. But in this moment, even though he's talking about overthrowing an empire, even though he's talking about introducing information that in his brain is going to lead to revolt, when he's on a large scale, he can kind of conceptualize this war. When he's on a small scale, it gets too dirty for him. And Saw, I mean, not to do the meme from whatever. He has clarity of vision. He has clarity of purpose.
Mm-hmm.
He gets it. Like, yeah, we're gonna have to kill these guys. Like, what do you want? Like,
We're going to have to kill these guys, Steven.
yes, it is. Yeah.
It is.
And Saul gets that. But it is interesting to see, and you kind of have to get brought along on this trip. But it is kind of like funny for us to be like, Bale, like, dude, like that's what I'm kind of like. I'm sitting here like, Bale, like, do you not get it? Like, these guys are coming to kill you, and it is. I don't know. It's interesting. That's why he kind of frustrates me, but also like, it's a real type of guy too, and obviously the discomfort with violence comes from a good place, but I don't think he really gets it. He's still sheltered from that. I do think that as a side note, I do think that this book does a good job in a way that Star Wars media hasn't previously of like acknowledging how fucked up the whole clones thing is. They throw it out several times, like Separatists, like, yeah, y'all grew guys and threw them into battle and they were like 10 years old. And I don't know if I've ever seen that really anywhere else except a little bit of Clone Wars. So, good on that perspective on it.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Like I like it when they do it with clones a little more so than I like when they do it with droids, but that's also another thing.
Yeah.
Like when they do the droids rights things, it's just one of those things that if you pull a little too much on that thread, it could theoretically like bring the whole universe down in a sense.
Yeah.
At least the narrative concedes. But I do like a little flavor of it does go a long way. I really like that they at least acknowledge it.
That is so fascinating to me, especially because like it takes place in the context of like There's a senator that Mon Mothma is trying to get to sign on to her, like, big, beautiful, like, Empire bill. And this senator is basically like Dianne Feinstein. She's senile. She's constantly challenging people to, like, I don't know, exploding poker or whatever.
Which is how Dianne Feinstein died. Don't let them tell you otherwise.
That's true. That's true. And like all the like negotiation, all the like communication is going through Senator Dukosen's droid aide. And you get the sense that, okay, so she's like the Edith Wilson, like with the 19th Amendment sort of thing here, right? Like, were it not for this senator being senile, like, the influence wouldn't have been wielded in this way. And I there's so much that you could drill down on, just such infinite politics, for all that I talk about, like, politicking being ultimately futile in this setting. There's so much interesting facets to it on the way to, ultimately the dissolution of the Senate. There's so many stories you could dig into.
Yeah, they're spending this whole book while Bale is running around on his little quest and Saw is, kicking ass and taking names. Mon is on Coruscant setting up deals to get this bill passed. This bill that will clarify, in quotes, which means take the Senate's power back, give it to the Senate. Keep Palpatine because he's too powerful, but basically keep him as a figurehead. That's her plan. And she thinks if the Confederacy, all the separatist systems, when they reintegrate, I can get all their votes and I can get all of the people that already supported me's votes. And then she's trying to shore up more coalition. She's trying to get the corporations, anyone she can on board to vote for this bill. What do Manu, what do you think about this section? And I found this to be really interesting. And it's also interesting because obviously anyone who's reading a Star Wars novel will know how this ends up,
Right. The push and pull of the Senate and the Emperor is kind of like a toss away line in the very first movie that it's been dissolved, but it does then set up the implication that there's been a 20-ish year struggle between the Emperor and the Senate, and this actually predates him declaring himself Emperor. It seemed like getting declared the emergency powers as Chancellor is kind of where Palpatine's overreach was starting to be discussed in Attack of the Clones. So this is definitely an important political part. And I do think it's also very smartly paced in the sense that while all the action is happening with Bale and Saw, that they have one of these plot lines that's a little more integrated into the political world, which allows it to be a little bit slow moving. They do find ways to add excitement to it. There is the assassination attempt that you mentioned at the end. You get a little glimpse of her home life, which is, I think, very insightful because she seems to be on kind of decent terms with her husband, Perrin, which is another thing. We know she's going to be on the outs with him by the time Andor rolls around. But they seem to, you can see that there's a little bit of friction in their relationship, but they're still kind of working as a team. Like there's, I think, like a party or something early on where Mon is being cornered by people she doesn't want to deal with, or reporters, and Perrin is able to like swoop in, turn the conversation away, protect his wife, essentially. Not something we'd expect him to see by the time we get to Andor season 1. So I really like
it. Is interesting, like in this book, though, you do see, like, despite him doing that, there's a scene where it says, I just had sex with my husband. That's crazy. Like, so they're not doing that well,
Yeah, exactly. But like with the politics of it all, if you are a liberal, this is what you do believe is the way to do things, right?
Yeah.
And like, it is kind of cute that she thinks like, oh, we can just freeze the Emperor out. Like he's like some figurehead who became Emperor. This isn't like the 1830 revolution in France where they just put Louis Philippe in charge, but it was really the bankers that were going to rule Paris now. This was the coup was done by the Emperor himself. He put him. So this is closer to Napoleon than it is Louis Philippe. So the idea that he could just be completely iced out by this big spending bill that defines the powers, that reasserts the Senate's authority on certain things, that they have, the power of the purse or to declare war or whatever it might be. I think it's very ill-fated, but I just generally think speaks to how in the immediate aftermath, no one really knows what's going on. Like they really don't understand like no one really understands the nature of Palpatine, not even close yet. Bale would be the only one who'd have a shot at it, and it seems like he doesn't even really get it at this point. And I think by simple virtue, it's kind of one of those things where it's just like, yeah, because he is an all-powerful space wizard, it kind of just breaks everything that she's doing, that we have the, dramatic irony or the dramatic knowledge that is what he is, and that's what she is up against. It does kind of color our opinion of how feasible this is. Then I think that's where I think just ultimately the writing of Alexander Freed pays off, because it's at least able to keep you compelled within the like smaller narratives that are kind of building you to that point. And I do kind of view it as like pacing it, because at the end, she's the one who gets the exciting set piece with the assassination attempt and chase through Coruscant. After all the stuff on Io Duritz kind of cools down, she gets to be kind of the big Act 3 finish action set piece kind of thing. So I think they do a really good job of keeping her like on simmer while also keeping her plot, pretty engaging, and then know to turn it up when they have to put other things to cool down for a little bit.
No doubt. Yeah, this power struggle is an interesting way of you putting it. It starts with the emergency powers. I love that Jar Jar Binks is like the Paul von Hindenburg of this.
He's the key to all this.
The guy who accidentally, doesn't even like Palpatine, but like trips over his dick and like makes him Führer. Crazy. This Star Wars is so unserious sometimes. I love it. But so Mon knows she's going to need help from the Separatists that are going to be reintegrated, right? She realizes that her bill is not going to pass without that. And so she has a secret meeting with them. They kind of have a sort of secret council where they all meet, place where they've all talked. They're obviously on the outs. They're all afraid of being tried as war criminals. They're afraid of this, that, and the other. They're in a very vulnerable position, and their worlds are suffering. And they want to make sure their worlds don't fall apart. They say, this leader of them, Novolio, says, the Empire could bring famine, plague, death to our planets by doing nothing more than refusing to grant us aid. We depend on shipments of medicine and food because our factories and fields were burned. Raxus Secundus still lacks running water. We cannot save ourselves because the only abundance in the galaxy is in the cradle of the Empire.
No fan of Ezra Klein.
Abundance has been Ezra Klein confirmed on Palpatine's staff. Yeah, she has this meeting with them, and she has to win them over to her position. These people who left the Empire for, when we hear about it, mostly pretty decent reasons, or they left the Republic originally for mostly decent reasons. But of course, it was all a play, and it was backed by the corporations. We know this if we've seen the movies. But this book does get into the sort of nuts and bolts of why there are people who pulled out of the Republic and what they wanted to do and their different perspectives on the matter. What do we think of this whole section where Mon is essentially on trial by these people trying to decide if she's going to be an effective leader?
I mean, it's ultimately deniability that she wins them over with, right? She's staking her reputation as a politician on the allegiance of the Separatists, right? So they can effectively throw her under the bus if this whole thing doesn't work out.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting because when you read something like the chapter is literally called "The Trial of Mon Mothma," and when you read the trial of a character, you kind of have the idea is like we're going to put them on trial for all the things we know that they've done, and kind of put a reading on them, kind of like an exclamation point on the character. But this is kind of the beginning of Mon Mothma's sentence. This is like the start of the career that matters for her, that climaxes with the rebellion and the New Republic that sets up after that. So it is kind of weird to have a trial before the things that we usually judge a fictional character for. But I do like it. Like she can be completely expendable. That's like somehow she has turned that into a political virtue, something that is of value to them in a way that makes because doing the rejoining the Republic or the Empire, I'm doing the thing the characters in the book do, is it's a tough political sell, especially for some of the local populations or local interests at these separatist planets that might have supported it, trying to make sure that they are integrated in a way that they feel welcome back. And whether they should be welcome back is obviously a very fraught political topic. The 4040s or whatever are organizing against that, or at least very unhappy with that and feel like they should be, subaltern to like the loyal planets or something like that. So I really like that Mon doesn't have a lot to offer, but somehow she's still able to work that into a way that she's able to build this coalition around what she needs. Again, we have the benefit of hindsight to know how useless a lot of this is long term. But it is kind of a political win, and it does kind of show her to be one of those savvy political figures. I mean, this is the realm in which she operates. We definitely criticize liberals for operating within the space, but this is how you can effectively do something like that. So that's why she is like the one good liberal, fictional or otherwise, to ever exist. Not quite there yet, but
useful.
Yeah,
it's a useful framing of having this intriguing political drama. It's a great counterweight to something like The West Wing or some of these shows that are very much like, if you make the debates and you get your coalition and you do your args, then you can transform society completely. And sometimes it'll be messy, but it'll be democracy. And this is something where it's like she does all that. She is like the ultimate character on like a show like The West Wing.
Mm-hmm.
Like she is like an Aaron Sorkin wet dream. And it doesn't matter because of the way power is actually structured. And for the kind of the reader also to get that message, and for Mon herself to get that message, we have to walk through this journey with her. And it manages to stay compelling because she remains always in these different levels of like physical danger, possibly getting captured. She's operating in a semi-legal space, but she manages to win the Separatists over. And indeed, when we go up to the vote, she's managed to win over a pretty significant coalition, and it gets sealed by the events that unfold on Coruscant, because Sojin and Bail escape together. Saw splits in another direction, and the two of them, after stopping at Sojin's not his home planet, but his planet where his people were, and finding they died in the war, pretty tragic scene. Sojin at this point is fully broken. He's fully like, well, I don't believe in the Separatists. I don't believe in the Empire, the Republic. I don't even have really a people to fight for the most part. I'm going to do as much damage as I can. Sojin returns to the planet, or not returns to the planet, sorry. Sojin goes to Coruscant and manages to slip away. There's a big manhunt. Mon Mothma ends up using her Separatist contacts to work with him, and she stops him from carrying out his attempt on the Emperor's life by setting off a bomb in his head. Well, basically, that she was given that information from the Separatists, this failsafe. What do we think of the fact that Sojin is ready to go for Palpatine? Us knowing all the shit about unlimited power and all that stuff he has, probably not likely that he would win. But what do we think about this arc of it? This sort of action set piece on Coruscant, and the fact that Mon Mothma decides to put a stop to this attempt.
I wanted to see him try. I really did. There's a twofold tragedy here, I think. I mean, you have the tragedy of a Sojen Vaknalis, who is an accomplished guerrilla, an accomplished assassin, who has certainly a utility within the context of the militant resistance to the Empire that the moment demands, of course.
He would have been very helpful with Saw. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. But that's the thing, he is shackled to the separatist movement in a way that leaves him completely vulnerable and adrift when that movement is gone. Because, of course, how does Mon Mothma stop him? She says this code phrase that sets off Sojin's suicide bomb that he has on him at all times. So he's a guerrilla basically without an animating struggle. He's
mass space or really anything besides just him.
Right. He's ceased to be an independent political actor. He is a tool, essentially, as opposed to any force that can independently collaborate and negotiate. And there is that tragedy. There is also the tragedy of Mon Mothma gets rid of him specifically because an attempt on the Emperor's life might be this backlash that kills the separatist reintegration, which is crucial to her plan, of course. And that's the thing. The tragedy here is that she's working at cross purposes with Bail Organa because Sojin has downloaded the exonerating information from the Separatist cache. And now that's dead.
About the
And
Jedi, yeah.
and whatever you believe about the Jedi is whatever you believe. So yeah, Mon Mothma at cross purposes with Bail, at cross purposes with Saw, and that's where we kind of end up is, okay, well, we need to stop stepping on each other's toes here.
Yeah, it's I kind of think of it as an homage to the bomb that's in Shmi Skywalker's head that they talk about in the Phantom Menace, where that's why Watto enslaves her and little Annie because they have bombs in their head that will blow up. So I wonder if Watto had a code word so he could blow up the Skywalkers. It could have ended the whole Skywalker saga right there if you wanted
Could
to.
Watto have taken down Darth Vader even then, or do you think it was too late?
I don't know. The prophecy complicates everything.
He said, "Just did that."
Yeah, no, it's interesting because all chaos breaks down when Bail and Sojin arrive back at Coruscant. Because Sojin initially poses as a hostage taker, and that Bail's as his hostage because he viewed that as a safe way for both of them to integrate back into Coruscant. Otherwise, they'd be taken in, possibly interrogated, possibly disappeared forever. Who even knows at this point? I do see a certain logic in what Sojin is doing in the sense that he's clearly an adventurist, going for the Emperor just flat out right here. But there isn't really any political movement to join, right? And we've been talking about so far this episode that everyone's still kind of grasping to figure out what is going on. So maybe, he's just like, well, if no one really knows what's going on, maybe you just go straight to the top. Maybe it is like the infernal machine that they tried to blow up Napoleon with in 1799 or whatever. Just like, why not just take out the top guy and see what happens? And it is a strange counterfactual to think Mon Mothma ensured that the Emperor would go on. And, I don't know if Sojin had any real shot. Let's be honest. The Emperor has a lot of prescience. It seems like he's, can, kill you with his hands. He's also got this new, robotic samurai dude who can probably do a lot of that stuff for you and his own Praetorian. So I think Sojin has a very low shot, but it is still kind of a tempting, possibility. A contingency is like, just what if he only has to get lucky once, as the IRA would say. If he just caught Palpatine on the bad day, found him on the shitter like Tywin Lannister. I assume that Palpatine still has to poop, even though he's a dark Sith, whatever. Dark Lord of the Sith, that's the term I'm
shit like
you actually have to poop more if you're a Dark Lord of the Sith.
Yeah, you gotta shit out all the good that builds up from
that's
not
true.
murdering people all the day. So it is kind of interesting, but it is kind of this does kind of make clear that sometimes the people writing in some of these extended universe novels don't know what's happening in the new show, because there is a little bit of Andor season 2, without getting into spoilers, where Mon is a little horrified at people dying in front of her. So it is kind of like 18 years earlier, her triggering someone else's, suicide vest seems, not out of character per se, but it is kind of just like, it sticks out a little bit coming off of Andor season 2. But you do kind of see, again, she believes in this liberalism stuff. She believes it's not just about your political goals, but the process by which you achieve them, and being committed to the process as much as she is to those ideals. She, blows it all up. And this is, again, because of the circumstances, because both her and Bail were captured, right? Not captured, but they were interned for a while, both on their return from to Coruscant, right? Wherever Mon met with her separatist buddies, and then Bail coming back. For Bail, I think it was more of an official debriefing as opposed to that he was taken in. But functionally, it works the same. They're released together. But I think they missed an opportunity there. I know they connected a little bit on what to do, but clearly Mon's all about her plan. Bail's all about his plan, and as we'll talk about, Saw is all about his plan. And I think part of the point of a show like Andor is that taking everyone's rebellion and making it into one rebellion, or rather a rebel alliance. And I think this kind of really sets that up as a clear endpoint, whether it is the third book of the series or just Andor and Rogue One and all that. I think it helps really kind of define that and set it up for the last 2 acts of the story.
Yeah. The bill passes, though. The bill passes. It's a very tense moment. Bail's in the Senate. Mon's injured. The bill goes through. And then Mon basically gets pulled into a meeting with the Grand Vizier, Ameda, and he's like, good job. You did a really good job. This was really impressive. The bill can't be allowed to stand, of course. And he says, the Emperor, and then she says, the Emperor has no power to veto. And he says, he's the Emperor. This is the Empire. His power, Senator Mothma, is absolute.
He says what we've all been thinking this whole time, as the bill has been whittled down and carve-outs given to like its bourgeois backers, and compromises made on the influence of the regional governors, some of which are human supremacists and slavers. Like, okay, maybe the emperor's influence is restricted, hypothetically. We still have these slaver warlords. And then finally, we get to the point where it passes, and, mad respect to Mas Amida for coming out and saying it.
Yeah, and he says, and she tries to go, well, the power of any government is contingent upon the will of the people, and he says, and he basically goes point by point on, if you do this, this will happen. If you do this, this will happen. If you do this, this will happen. The workers won't rise up. And if they do, we'll bomb them. And if we do, the corporations won't back you. But if we do, we'll nationalize them. The people won't rise. They'll call you this. They'll call you that. And he basically says, we just got done with a war. Are you willing to start another one? Which, like, here's the question. Does Mon make the right call here by not going for it in this moment? Or were they just so impossibly outgunned that this was the wrong moment? Or does Mon fail the intimidation check here? Is this politically smart of her to back down here, or should she have gone back and told her people, all right, we got to rise up against this guy? What do y'all think?
I mean, I think she knows when she's beaten at long last. He shows her, Mas Amida does, this re-education facility which Saw Gerrera and his folks have dynamited. I don't even know if dynamite exists in the Star Wars universe, but you know what I mean.
Something.
And it's like one of 5, soon to be 6 as it happens, and soon they'll be able to mass produce them. We really get a sense of the scale of the Empire that we haven't gotten yet. There's that, and there's also the myopia of Mon Mothma really comes into view here, because this is the first time that she's really made an appeal on behalf of, what if the working people rise up? And, Mas Amida says, you haven't been talking to those people. He's not the only one who says it throughout, right? But she's confronted with that in this moment, right? You haven't been talking to these people. You're out of touch with the regular people. You've been courting corporations and movers and shakers and, trillionaires, and meanwhile, the Emperor has been winning over the masses with his fake populism. Sorry, you lost this one. So I do think that stepping down here, it's belated, but nonetheless the necessary move.
And you have him say, would you really start a war, Mon Mothma? You, the outspoken pacifist, knowing the cost would inevitably fall on the wretched, the exhausted creatures still limping from the separatist conflict. Would you go to war against the Emperor? Because if not, there's no threat you can make that we cannot counter with overwhelming force. And I think that's actually a question that's very pertinent and interesting, because she eventually comes down on the side of, yeah, I am willing to start a war over this shit. You know what I mean? Maybe not in this moment. Maybe she decides tactically I can't, or maybe doesn't have the stomach for it now. You can say what reason. But by the time of Andor, by the time of the Galactic Civil War, she has decided, we can imagine, mulled this speech over 1 million times every night when she's falling to sleep next to her shitty husband. She's just through the years becoming more and more callous, I guess I am, dude. And I think what we have to come to terms with here is, maybe Saw Gerrera could use a little refinement, but he gets it from the beginning that this is not going to be won in the Senate. When you play in the Senate, you've already lost. Not to say that it's not useful to agitate or do what you can, or, pass this and that and agitate for it. But they've realized this is a power structure. This has now been ingrained. This is going to be a real battle. And this is the moment where Mon Mothma comes to face with that, looks down on the planet, sees this prison facility, and is like, oh shit, we can't vote our way out of
A
this.
prison facility, which, by the way, Saw Gerrera needed Bail Organa's access codes to get into, right? He needed those clearances to get into it and plant the charges. And this reads as particularly pertinent to our current situation, given that members of Congress are by law permitted to inspect detention facilities in this country, right? So to me, I'm reading this and I'm like, okay, but what's the next step from that, right? And this is that.
Yeah, I do think the Mon Saw comparison is interesting because for Mon Mothma, the Clone Wars was still going to the Imperial Senate and debating policy and what to do. Right, Saw was actually on the ground fighting, as a kind of republic or as kind of just like a satellite or a proxy. And that kind of got drawn into the bigger politics, and especially by the rise of the Empire, is obviously ossified, or at least declared what side he's clearly on. Mon, it was like, she's also a little bit of a 9-to-5er, not unlike hockey, right? Whether it's the Republic or the Empire, she's still going to the Senate and talking to the same people, the conservatives, the liberals. And I do think what the Grand Vizier kind of like hits her with is kind of that contradiction of liberalism, right? It is utopian in the sense that it values democracy above all else, but a real material democratic movement, like a movement that's tied to the masses, that's subject to popular forces and the popular will. That is not really what she's done. As you've said, she's been working with corporations and just other politicians, whether as part of the Confederacy of Separatists or part of just the existing empire. God, I keep doing that. So I think it does kind of expose like the limits of what that does, especially when the power you're contending with, the emperor and the like kind of state in this case, which is just like, yeah, we will just use violence to preserve the order when we need to, because you have a handful of people who do have power, who do have wealth, but it is not a popular move. It's not something that you can mobilize and just take the galaxy into war again, just mere weeks or months by this point, after the last war ended. Like we were saying, people had lost their appetite for war. So Mon, has to, weigh that as well amongst all her other political calculations of what to do, is that people just might not be in the headspace to rise up. They are not in the headspace to receive this information at this moment.
Yeah. In here we realize the Emperor doesn't just have a one-day plan or whatever. This is a century plan of transforming society. He has a Project 2025 or whatever, a Project 100 ABY. And he says here to her, Mas does, "You are free to go home and hold your news conference and call the passage of the Rebirth Act a triumph. You can pick fights with the governors and push back against the executive and earn the admiration of your peers who wish for a return to the Republic. The Emperor understands the value of opposition. You're a fine administrator, so please do administrate, but you will not interfere with things that matter. The century plan will move forward because there are actions the Emperor will not abide. You are a pragmatic woman, Mon Mothma, not an ideologue, and I believe you understand this." And I think that's important because while Mon Mothma, of course, makes a different choice, the overwhelming majority of progressive politicians in real life do not make the call Mon Mothma makes here, right? They're like, I am going to, filter, do stuff around the edges, even do admirable stuff around the edges, right? But I'm not going to challenge the system. And when we think of things that actually matter, when he's talking about that, we can think in real life of things like imperialism and war and the structure and the rule of capital. And the best that you really can do, at least that we've seen to date inside Congress without some kind of mass movement, whatever that ends up looking like, historically looks like a reform that will be taken back. And it does not actually look like the end of the empire we see in real life. And Mon Mothma, of course, does not make the call that some of the politicians we've seen in real life do. She takes this moment, she lets it radicalize her, and she starts building a rebel alliance. And at the very end of this, we have just this moment where she says, "Does the Emperor believe any of it? All this talk about peace and order and reform? Is it just a way for him to dominate, or does he believe it even a little?" And he looks and he says, "The remarkable thing is, I never thought to ask." Right? And it's because it doesn't matter if he believes, right? People like to say stuff like, "Yeah, Donald Trump doesn't really believe in this evangelical." Who gives a shit if he does it? You know what I mean? It's interesting, but who gives a shit if he does it?
He still puts these people in charge of the Pentagon, the people who believe that we have to go to war with Iran and put all the Jews in one place and blow them up, and that's how we go to space. And sorry, it's not space, heaven, God. Like the people who believe this shit still have their fingers on the shiny red buttons,
Mm-hmm. Ted Cruz just gave a great interview today where he talked about how we should go to war with Iran, and then he couldn't say it's ethnic makeup or population, but he said the Bible told him to. Cool stuff. But I say that to say not that it's a one-to-one, but it's this interesting dynamic too of like, this is how power works and it doesn't end up mattering. And whether the emperor was a space wizard or not, you still got to take this motherfucker down.
I can't read where Mass Amida says, "You've offered up your threats, your portrait of resistance," and here resistance is italicized by the corporations, the nobility, the elite of the coddled core worlds. I can't not read resistance with a hashtag, right?
Yeah.
Because he is right to say that your movement that you're building, which is fundamentally bourgeois, disconnected from the masses, like it's not going to work. And yeah, you're absolutely right. She does learn from this, belated as the learning opportunity is.
Mm-hmm. And that takes us into the very end. And yeah, do either of you want to basically explain what happens at this very final scene here?
Sure. So, a big picture, our three main characters, Saw, Bale, and Mon Mothma, have essentially like a little secret council. And I'm going to admit I don't remember the exact details of what they're saying, but they're basically saying like we have to coordinate our shit a little bit better than we did. Mm-hmm. There's a little bit of, I think, quid pro quo. I think this is where Saw gets the prison codes or whatever it was. Maybe not. But I know there's a little bit of information and some access that's going back and forth here. It does still feel like Saw is mostly going to do his own thing for the most part, and that's probably actually beneficial for Mon and Bale at this point too, to have some kind of deniability and remove from him while still kind of vaguely supporting his cause. So that kind of sets up. And this was a part where I was maybe a little not sure how much I loved it, but again, this is something that ultimately depends on how the next two books will ultimately face it. Because you do kind of, at least I got the feeling from Andor season 2 that like Yavin is where a lot of these disparate parts of the Rebel Alliance start to really converge. So putting Saw and Mon, which I kind of view as like two ends of the spectrum of the Rebel Alliance, even though, again, I think Mon's a little bit more base than, her outward appearances to the rest of the people, especially by Rogue One Andor time. But, having them be like in direct conversation, I was kind of wondering if that was a dramatic thing they could have held off on, because that even Mon and Saw crossing paths, that could have been an end of book 3 thing, and I would have felt that would be satisfying timing wise. So to kind of get it here, I felt like maybe that's a little too soon. I might want to see maybe a little bit more operating on their own, or not really, having a mystified concept of what the other person's doing. Like, I would like to have a book where Mon's like, who's the Saw Gerrera fellow that keeps popping up in the like third page of the Muse saying that they bombed this planet? That sounds like a guy that I should at least learn about or something. And she can get her.
There is an interesting bit here where Saw asks, how can we stay in contact? And she says, you will not contact me. Not ever. Not unless the galaxy is at stake. Which does open up potentially at some point he will decide whether or not she agrees. This is the time I have to contact her. And there could be something interesting there.
Yep.
Where that lands. But I agree with you. I think it is, they still are not at all reconciled. It has kind of their three theories here where it says Saul could fight his unwinnable battles and become a hero and a martyr, inspiring followers who throw themselves against the Emperor's army of death. Bale could keep the flame of purity alive to remind them all and remind the galaxy of what another way could look like. And Mon could levy attacks on arms production here, organize the mega corporations to oust a governor there. She would compromise and walk away tainted, and she would change lives. That was kind of the three things that they're splitting up to do. Bale, to be clear, is basically going to turn Alderaan into a think tank. I mean, I'm only kind of kidding. Alderaan is going to be a place where like scholars can come that can criticize the Empire. They're going to do their best to protect people. They'll take in refugees. They'll try and locally look like a good society that wants to be emulated. You'll note, what's the planet that Grand Moff Tarkin decides to blow the fuck up? It's Alderaan. You know what I mean? It eventually they decide that it needs to be crushed. So clearly he's pretty successful in that. He clearly creates a society that is a threat by its example. Um, and yeah, that's where we leave it. We leave it there with these three ideas, but they're going to coordinate to some extent, and presumably that coordination will become more and more in tune. And I mean, that's partially what Andor is about. But ultimately, like, it is, with the benefit of us having seen the films, gonna be handled Saw's way. They're gonna win by blowing shit up, like, and by uprisings. Like that is eventually what is going to work. Um, and Mon Mothma is fully aware of that, and she's going to ride that wave and eventually become Chancellor of the New Republic, based on our current novels.
Yeah, which
Uh,
which which again, there again is the necessity of having Saw, not be a point of view character, because you have to be walked through this, and you have to have seen the standard levers of power and the standard channels fail before you're comfortable with, okay, well, we need to blow up some space Walmarts here and there.
mhm.
And there is indeed, something constructive in this as well, as there must be in any revolutionary project. Because what's the last thing we see Saul doing? Right, he goes to the remnants of Sojen Vaknalis's species, one of the clans, and he's giving them this time a something resembling an actual organization with a with a concrete goal to fight for.
And he's
And
giving
he's
them food and stuff. One is reminded of, the the Federalistas, up in the mountains, going to villages and stuff, and winning people over.
good clanspeople of Haramis, will you listen to my story, is genuinely one of my favorite lines in this entire book.
Yeah,
He's coming to them with a vision, and he's certainly not sticking bombs in them.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The people, he's harsh, but the people are following him, and you can even see in Andor, like, the people that are with him, they might be some crazy motherfuckers, but like, you got to be kind of crazy to be one of these guys, and it is it is what it is. Like, they're the rebellion doesn't survive without them. It doesn't happen without them, and
Re-
it doesn't.
rev- yeah, revolution's not for the sane. I think that's like
Right.
words right out of his mouth.
Yes, he says that, and without Saw, his sort of protracted war, there will never be this full scale organized army that would later emerge, um, as the Rebel Alliance. Um, yeah. So ultimately, this is a fascinating book. I had a lot of fun with it. I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes in the future. There's going to be different authors, so who knows what that's going to end up looking like. But if Star Wars stays at this tone going forward, then yeah, we might be cooking again. We'll see. We might get some more stinkers before we get some more good stuff. But between this and Andor season 2, I'm enjoying it. Did any of y'all have any final thoughts on the book before we close out here?
Yeah, I think it's good. I think it's good that there is space for Star Wars to play in that Andor kind of milieu, where there is an appetite for stories that might be more grounded in the political, looking at different characters' tendencies within, a protracted struggle. I think it's, the time between the two original trilogies is like a great, exploration of that. Obviously, they filled in a lot of that material with some of the ancillary material, but lot of space. There's almost 2 decades worth of time to play in. And I just hope we get more stuff like this, because I'm not particularly looking forward to The Mandalorian and Grogu or Ahsoka
Yeah.
season 2. Who knows about this Sean Levy Star Wars movie? I did not like Deadpool 3.
Mhm.
At this point, when we have a million other things that we could possibly enjoy art wise, I might be a little bit more picky with Star Wars, knowing that they have the capability of doing something like Andor or spin-off stuff like this book. I don't need to dip into everything that looks like, it was filmed 3 miles outside of Los Angeles.
Sure.
And,
There was
yeah.
just an announced Darth Maul show that takes place in this era.
Oh, can
So
we
we'll
let him
see.
die already?
We did twice.
We've seen him die twice. We know how he actually dies now because it happens in Rebels. And it's a pretty cool scene. I won't spoil it for anyone who's interested. Not my favorite show in the world, but a pretty cool moment. But the Maul show, potentially could be interesting. Maul links up with some Saul Guerrero types, starts doing some guerrilla shit. I don't know. Um, the word is apparently it's going to be like Maul seeing the Empire and going, wait, I thought we were going to build like cool space sorcery stuff. This sucks. Like, it's just techno fascism. Like, what the hell is this? Which, there could be something to that, or it could just be slop,
Mhm.
make us proud. Whoever's working on the show,
Mhm.
give us some cool stuff. Give us another weird, fucked up perspective on this, like, congealing fascist project
Mhm.
from a guy who like helped bring it about, but kind of was like thought it was going to be a different thing. Who
Mhm.
knows? The monarchist who wanted to restore the Kaiser, who then get neutralized by Hitler, basically. I don't know, somebody like that.
There is a bit very early in the book when we're seeing Mon Mothma have her first sort of dinner with Lud Maroy. There's like something potentially like romantic between them that never really blossomed. Neither here nor there, but it's mentioned that while they're discussing the developments that have taken place, the conversion of the Republic into the Empire, and what that still means, which is not yet entirely clear, what is left unsaid, what Mothma specifically avoids saying, is her detention and torture in solitary by Imperial intelligence. And that's really intriguing to me because she's speaking to somebody who still fundamentally believes in the institutions of the Empire, in the attitudes, and in the processes that have led to this point. And in such company, under such a milieu that nobody really wants to believe has passed its expiration date, torture is something abstract. It is something that happens only to people who deserve it. Right? There is a consent manufacturer for atrocity even under the Republic. And I think under the Empire is where it gets much more blatant, but it's always been kind of simmering and bubbling there. And it catches up to our characters in ways that finally wake them up. And that's what I kind of want to dwell on as we end here, because at time of recording, on the day of recording, the Scrimeti versus U.S. decision has just dropped. States can now legally bar gender-affirming care from trans minors. It is worded in such a way that, according to a couple of the concurrences, effectively defines transgender people out of existence as a protected class, leaves the way open for adult bans, who knows what else. And if ever, that's going on here. Across the Pacific, of course, we may be looking at a new major regional war. Who knows where that could go? The point I want to make is we are long, long past the time to realize that there are people who want us dead. And they're coming for the rest of y'all, marginalized or no. So, to the extent that institutional actors are useful, and I'm not talking about the Democratic Party because they're actively hostile to our cause, to the extent that your attorneys, your orators, your journalists are useful, uplift them, support them. Their their rhetoric, their argumentation, their propaganda, because propaganda is not a dirty word. It just means explicit political message. Support your Mon Mothmas, support your Bales where they are useful, but also recognize that the time may be coming for your Saws and perhaps even your Sojins.
Well, whatever time it is, we do appreciate our time with you. How was that, Manu? We really appreciate you coming on the show. What do you have to plug? Tell us about your shows. Tell us about what you do. We said at the top, but let them know because you really do some cool work.
Oh,
And I mean, relevant to it, you've got a direwolf hanging up right behind you.
Yes, House Stark for life. So yeah, I'm a man of many podcasts. You can find me most regularly at NotACast, ASOIAF, Not a Cast, which is a riff on George R.R. Martin's blog, Not a Blog. Haha, get it? But anyways,
I do in fact get it.
that is a chapter by chapter analysis of all the A Song of Ice and Fire books. We are currently in book 4 of 5. So we have almost 6 years of back catalog for you to join. I did join that podcast about 3 years ago, so I wasn't on it from the beginning. But we are knee deep in A Feast for Crows, covering Cersei and Jaime and Brienne. Oh my! My other podcast is My Brother, My Captain, My Podcast, which is a Lord of the Rings podcast where we kind of go through the Lord of the Rings film trilogy, kind of one scene at a time, same concept. We do a lot of book Tolkien stuff over there, but we are currently doing Andor coverage over there. So we're doing a three-part series on Andor season 2. We've dropped the first episode. We just recorded our second episode, and a third one will be coming sometime in July. And also with the NotACast, our Patreon episode of this month was also heavily focused on Andor. So if you like this chat, if you want to hear me talk more about Andor and what it has to do with Maoism, you can definitely check out any of those. Otherwise, you're free to follow me at Manuclearbomb. It's nuclear bomb, just with M-A in front of it. That is my handle at every social media. I'm usually posting pictures of my cats, ranting insanely about communism, or talking about Andor.
I think you're ranting quite sanely about communism. I think it's quite sane, and we need more of it. I just got to say, people who listen to this podcast, of course, y'all like our overviews of books, but we don't do chapter by chapter analysis the way y'all do on NotACast, and it's really remarkable the way you're able to keep it fresh and interesting and get into the nitty gritty. So especially if you're into the books they're talking about, Song of Ice and Fire, into Lord of the Rings, you got to check it out. It's worth doing because these books are every book has plenty of content, but these books are very, very full of, they're meaty. There's a lot to unpack. There's a lot to get into. So highly recommend. It's something that I've enjoyed before. Very good stuff, and looking forward to y'all getting to the end of the series, and hopefully maybe there's a little more of this series by the time you get to the series, but we'll see. We love them either way, don't we? Don't we, folks?
We got at least 4-ish years, maybe, until we hit the end of the published content. So hopefully George Martin himself will oblige us with another book. I do want to thank both of you for having me on. You guys have a tremendous project here. I love what you're doing. I appreciate socialism, and I appreciate books. They're my two favorite things in the world. So glad you guys are doing that. And thank you so much for having me on. I'd love to be on again at some point. Maybe this second book comes out, maybe. Who knows?
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Would love that. All right. Well, Lenore, do you have anything to close us on?
If you're going to firebomb a space Walmart, just have a plan.
Get Bail Organa's codes. The prison maybe makes more sense than
what
Walmart.
If he starts a quote unquote bail fund for all the people that go to jail for bombing Walmarts, space Walmarts, that is.
A bail fund.
Space Fannie Willis files space recap charges in space Fulton County.
We might have last minute got an episode titled Bail Fund. All right, folks. Appreciate y'all. You have a good one.
Stay safe.
Thank you for listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.